Hey, LA Progressive friends and family. This is Dick Price and Sharon Kyle coming to you from the LA Progressive. This is our office. And we kind of run on a real short budget, so a small budget. So we're asking you to, if you can't contribute, to at least share, to join, to subscribe, and to give us a thumbs up. Thanks so much.
Welcome, LA Progressive readers. This is Dick Price, the editor, without Sharon Kyle, the publisher, this one time. Today, I'm pleased to sit down with W.D. Earhart, Bill Earhart, who's a longtime contributor to the LA Progressive. He's a fellow Vietnam veteran, fellow Purple Heart awardee, longtime teacher, prolific writer, poet whose most recent book is What We Can and Can't Afford, Essays on Vietnam, Patriotism, and American Life. How are you doing, Bill?
Hi, Dick. It's a pleasure to talk to you. That I've been dealing with you, and you've been very good to me in my writing for I don't know, at least 10 years now.
Yeah.
But you're on the West Coast and I'm on the East Coast, and this is really the first time we've ever directly talked.
Yeah.
So it's nice.
That's I don't know how many of our authors is that way. Occasionally I will meet them face to face like this, and it'll be the first time in forever. It's a joy to meet you, and I've always enjoyed your contributions left and right, especially since we have some familiarities or similarities in starting off our adulthood in Vietnam. God bless us. So recently you submitted an article called The Second Coming, and you make the connection between W.B. Yeats's famous poem and the second coming we're facing next week. How'd you make that connection?
Well, it was it was pretty obvious. That poem, of course, is one of Yeats's greatest, although it's not quite my favorite. There's one other I like even better of his, but in any case, here he's talking about the second coming, and the thing ends up with this rough beast slouching toward Bethlehem. And what could be a better image than this rough beast we have slouching toward Washington, D.C. for the second time around, the second coming of, I have various nicknames for him.
Yeah.
Trumposaurus, Humpty Dumpty, Trumpelstiltskin. Anyway, it just seemed the connection popped right into my head because the Yeats poem is one of my favorites. I sent the article to some friends of mine. One, a woman that I went to college with, have known for 50 some years. And she wrote back and said, I was just thinking of that very same poem. So it seems to be appropriate for the situation we're facing.
So shortly after you were in Vietnam, you hooked up with the Vietnam Veterans for Against War, and you're still very active in the Veterans for Peace. So so in terms of wars we might get into, wars we might get out of, ending the genocide in the Middle East, what do you think the Trump administration threatens to do?
Well, I have a feeling that, of course, Trump is talking about taking Greenland, which the Greenlanders don't seem too happy about, and reclaiming the Panama Canal. How's he going to do that? Are we going to invade Panama again? I mean, the Americans have invaded Panama quite a few times historically, so maybe he will. Canada, good luck with that one, getting the Canadians to be a state in the United States. It's very interesting that even before he's taken office, this guy is suddenly talking about a new version of American Manifest Destiny and expanding the American empire, whereas he campaigned on this, I never started a war or anything, right? I'm less concerned about that bullshit because I think what's going on is that Trump is throwing out these ridiculous ideas to feed the MAGA mob and keep them distracted from the fact that his real agenda is to make the billionaires even more billionaires. I saw something recently where in 1980 there were something like 11 billionaires in the United States, and now there's something like 381 billionaires. So I think that this stuff that Trump is talking about doing is really just a smokescreen. What I'm more concerned about is the way in which Vladimir Putin is going to interpret this stuff. I would imagine that people in Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Moldova, Georgia, they're probably getting really nervous because it looks like Trump is basically saying to Putin, help yourself, take whatever you want. I'm going to.
Yeah,
so that's my bigger concern.
Yeah, and certainly the goes double for the people of the Ukraine who think the rug is going to be pulled out from under them is already happening.
Well, it is. It's going to be. Unfortunately, they're screwed. There's nothing. I'm curious to see what NATO is going to do in response to this. I have a feeling that NATO may not have many teeth in its mouth without the support of the United States, but I hope I'm wrong about that. I also expect that Trump is going to basically withdraw the United States from NATO.
Yeah. So you indicated that you were going to participate in a women's march for Veterans for Peace. So what's going on with Veterans for Peace? I mean, how active is it? How much influence is it having? And what's it trying to do?
For Peace, I probably shouldn't say this publicly, but Veterans for Peace is a very small organization. I doubt that they have more than 2,000 active members. I think that VFP has absolutely zero influence. I don't think anybody pays a damn bit of attention to what we're up to. But why I've been involved in it ever since the first summer it was founded in 1985. I do it because I support what they stand for, trying to put an end to war. When I was a young man in my 20s, I thought that stuff I could do, both in terms of my active participation and my writing, could change things, would make a difference in the world. I got a very rude comeuppance about that. By the time I was in my 30s, I realized nobody's paid a damn bit of attention to anything I'm doing. Why do I keep doing it? What am I supposed to do? Sell used missile parts? Be an insurance salesman? Not that I mind insurance salesmen, but I do it because it's what I have to do in order to live with myself. The Women's March, if you remember, right after, I think it was in 2016 or 17, there was a huge Women's March in Washington, D.C. What was it? The Pink Pussy Hat or something.
Right.
A couple 100,000 women down there. What difference did it make? But you do these things because you have to do them. I participate in Veterans for Peace. We have a local chapter here in Philly because it allows me to live with myself. I got an email recently from a friend of mine up in New Jersey who said that, what's he going to do? Actually, you guys ran a piece of mine, a review of that book of Chomsky and Robinson, which ended up with basically, do we either throw in the towel or do we just keep trying? And the only option is you just keep trying. So they're going to have another Women's March on Saturday, and a bunch of us guys from the VFP chapter decided we wanted to go, and we'll carry our VFP banner and it'll be there for anybody who happens to be out on the street. We support what these women are doing. So we're going to do it, and it's not going to make any difference. I know that, but what am I going to do on Saturday?
Yeah, so we had the same experience. There was a huge march here in LA, or not a march, but a protest for the Women's Day March. And I think it was 2016, right after Trump got elected. It was so full that when we went down to the local train station to take the train downtown to participate, we had to wait for 5 trains, 5 extra big trains that were full of people going down there, and the streets were so damn crowded. And it was a wonderful moment. You know, it was all the energy and all the pink pussy hats and so forth. But like you, then the next day, well, what difference did it make? And that's kind of key to me. I mean, we sometimes are good at having a fill the streets protest, but then it's got to translate into actual action, and that's kind of where we fall down. But like you, I mean, why does Sharon and I keep publishing the LA Progressive? I don't know that we've moved any needle anywhere, but what are we going to do? Sell insurance? You know, go sit in the sauna if we had one? Uh, I have to believe that it makes some difference that affects some people. I hope it does.
Well, and it certainly, I've had people tell me this frequently when I speak disparagingly about what I've been up to for most of my life, is that, you know, there millions and millions of people voted for Donald Trump, but millions of people didn't vote for him.
Right.
And publications like LA Progressive and things like this march on Saturday remind the people who think and feel like us that they're not alone.
Right.
It keeps them in the game. And so there is certainly value in that.
So do you want to talk briefly about what we can and can't afford, your most recent book? Describe what goes on in there.
Well, actually, a whole lot of the essays in there appeared in either LA Progressive or Hollywood Progressive. So you're fairly familiar with the contents. I keep having to wrestle with McFarland publishers, McFarland and Company, who've been very, very good to me over the years. I can't complain. But my niche with them is the Vietnam War. And so everything in mind they do, they got to somehow get Vietnam into the title. I was able to compromise with my collected poems, which is, I mean, it's really amazing that they even publish that. They don't publish poetry, never. But they did publish my collected poems. And if you've seen that book, it's got a photograph of me as a young Marine standing on a tank, standing right next to a tank. The title of "Thank You for Your Service" sort of implies military, and there's that photograph. But at least we didn't call it Vietnam War poems, because 3/4 of the poems in there have nothing to do with the war. Now, this recent collection, I think there's maybe there's, I don't know, there's like 50 or 60 essays in there, because now I write these really short things, 750 words, 1,000 words. And they wanted Vietnam in the subtitle. Well, there's not much in that collection that has to do with the Vietnam War. I now have almost 300 pages, manuscript pages of new essays that I've written since that book was published. And I'm going to be going back to McFarland within a year or so. I don't think the word Vietnam even appears in any of these essays. Certainly it's not the focus. And I don't want to mislead people who think they're going to read something about the Vietnam War when it's not there. So I don't know how I'm going to go negotiate that one with McFarland. We'll see when we get there. I figure it's about a year off. But meanwhile, the other one, essentially, I've been writing enough essays that I publish a book of essays about every decade. But recently, I've been doing even more of that since I retired. So it's going to be less than a decade before I offer them another book. But it's just one of the things I like about this. Obviously, you know, you folks will print almost anything I send you. You very seldom have not taken work of mine. I have a similar arrangement with a publication called the New Hampshire Gazette out of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Another wonderful guy, you'd like him. He's another Vietnam War veteran. He puts out this bi-weekly newspaper. He's really on our wavelength. But you know, I don't get paid for any of this stuff. But starting out as a poet and spending the first 30 years of my life taking poetry seriously, if you take poetry seriously, you forget about money. You're not going to make any money writing poetry. So I've never treated my writing as an economic function. I have other ways of keeping food in my mouth, including my wonderful wife who supported me mostly for 20 years. And what I discovered when I was still a young man in my 20s is that people will pay you to write what they want you to write.
Yeah. Yeah.
They'll pay you what they want to hear. I've never been interested in what other people want me to write. I worked for a newspaper for a while. I hated it. I worked for a health magazine, Rodale Press. I hated it. I don't care about any of that crap. I have things that I want to say, and you're willing to print that. And I tell people it keeps my head from exploding. There's a lot of I wrote a lot. I've written a lot in the last year about Donald Trump and the disaster that is ongoing. I have been very much opposed to the Israeli genocide in Gaza. I just saw something again in a major magazine where the editorial writing referred to the how do they say it? The terrorist massacre perpetrated by Hamas on October 7th, but not a word about the terrorist massacre of 42,000 dead Gazans.
Right.
That's terrorism too. And yet our media is so biased. In any case, none of what obviously the Israeli Defense Forces are still killing Palestinians. Trump is about to take over the White House again, turning it into the shit house. And nothing I've written has changed any of that, but my head's still here. My head hasn't exploded yet. That's the value of my writing as far as I'm concerned. It keeps me sane.
Yeah, a couple things. We accept what you send because it's so good and we enjoy it. And there's kind of connection with the fellow Vietnam veteran, fellow Purple Heart winner, and learned, I think, some of the same lessons out of Vietnam, even if the country ultimately didn't. And we've had one war after another. And I wonder, you mentioned wavelength with your friend who publishes a biweekly newspaper. Do you feel any wavelength harmony with the younger generations of veterans? Are they joining Veterans for Peace? Do they have the same revulsion for war that we ultimately had?
Some do. I think the majority do not. For one thing, there were a lot of folks who, a lot of veterans from the Vietnam War were there reluctantly. Now, I have to admit, I was not. I freaking volunteered when I was 17. When the Marine Corps sent me, the Marine Corps didn't send me to Vietnam right away, and so I kept complaining until they did send me.
Wow.
Duh. And I was in for a hell of a comeuppance when I got there and realized what I'd gotten myself into. But a lot of guys either were drafted or enlisted because they knew they were going to be drafted. And they weren't particularly enthusiastic about doing it. I think the greatest consequence of the American war in Vietnam was the creation of a so-called all-volunteer military. Right. It's not all volunteer, it's an economic draft. Right. And the people who have been signing up either they have no other real viable options in terms of a job or getting money for college, or they're these testosterone guys who want to get out there and be men. So you have a largely self-selecting group that's been in the U.S. military for the last 35, 40 years. And far fewer of them are going to question what they're up to. As you know, the training now is very much, it's a self-contained society in the active duty military. Their loyalties are to each other. Their ethos is a warrior ethos. They don't question what they're being told to do. They're warriors. That's what they are. But even with that, I have encountered from time to time assorted people who actually some people who have contacted me because they've stumbled onto my writing and they find affinities there. I've gotten in the last 6 weeks emails from 3 veterans of either the Iraq War or the Afghan War who are clearly very troubled by what they did and are finding stuff in my poetry that helps them make some sense of their own experiences and lets them feel like it's okay to be against what they did. I'm having lunch on the 25th with a man, he's not a young man anymore, but he's a lot younger than me, who fought in Iraq in the early, like 2003, 2004, and has been very, very disturbed by his experience, has become, he's been handling PTSD major league for a number of years. So there are people, and there are some younger folks in Veterans for Peace, but there's nothing like the anti-war movement that came out of the Vietnam War. There was for a while in the early 2000s an organization called Iraq Veterans Against the War.
Right.
I think they've now morphed into something called About Face. I think the organization still exists, but it's very small. It does not have the kind of visibility that VVAW had back in the late 60s and early 70s. I mean, that's very interesting, is during the war itself, what the American people saw of veterans were guys like us out in the street protesting that war.
Right.
Nobody was spitting on us or calling us baby killers or any of that bullshit. That stuff never happened. It simply didn't happen. And all of that has been transformed in American popular mythology into, the veterans were abused and blah, blah, blah. No. But the very visibility of VVAW, I think, had a lot to do with, and the breakdown of the military and military discipline in Vietnam itself. I mean, the active duty military became dysfunctional by 1972. I think that the generals pushed very hard to get an all-volunteer military so that would never happen again, and it hasn't. So, unfortunately, there hasn't been a significant portion of the veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan who have publicly turned against what they were doing. And moreover, there's no real anti-war movement. I mean, think about it. The Vietnam War, there were, by the late 60s, they were getting a couple 100,000 people in the streets every time they do something in Washington. The war in Afghanistan went on longer than the Vietnam War, and yet where was the anti-war movement? It wasn't there. I taught at an elite private school for nearly 20 years. Not a single one of the students that I taught ever did what I did. That is, graduate from high school and decide, I'm not going to college, I'm going to join the military as an enlisted guy, come in as a private. Not a single one of this, and I must have taught 1,600 students in the years I was there. Not one did that. Why in the hell should their parents give a rat's ass what's going on with their tax dollars as long as their kids aren't going to have to die? And that's, so there's no anti-war movement because most Americans have no skin in the game. And I've heard people say repeatedly, when things have gone badly in both Afghanistan and Iraq, well, those soldiers volunteered, they asked for it. That was their job. Too bad. Which, by the way, Biden took a real beating for withdrawing from Afghanistan, but the fact is that was the first smart decision the Americans made about Afghanistan since 1979.
Yeah.
And there wasn't going to be a clean exit from Afghanistan after 20 some years. It just wasn't going to happen, no matter what they would have done. So I was very happy. It's one of the things Biden did that I was very supportive of. I'm less keen on his approach to Israel and the Middle East, but
So like you, I volunteered for the draft for reasons having to do with a young man's nuttiness, and but the advantage to that was that once I got in Vietnam, I had nobody to bitch about. I'd signed up for it. I had a sense of what war would be like. Uh, but I said earlier that we didn't learn anything from Vietnam. Well, that's wrong. The government and the military learned some key lessons. Embed,
oh,
embed the media so that you don't have reporters out telling the truth and showing uncomfortable videos. The all volunteer army, and raise the tuition cost so much that a lot of people and lower the standard of living. So the young veterans that I know almost all went because there weren't any jobs in their community over in East LA, and they couldn't afford to go to college. And they initially, in the early part of the Afghan-Iraq mess, they thought they would go in for a few years. Now they got the stop loss thing, and they ended up serving 8 or 10 years, and are now dealing with PTSD. Yeah, and another thing is, and maybe this has always been true, but our entertainment media, our movies and television, one show after another glorifies gunplay and warfare, and you never see the star of a show who's a peacenik. I mean, that doesn't happen. So the society has been dumbed down to the point where we do these things. Who knows what we're going to do with Iraq and Palestine and the Panama Canal and Greenland. But I think we're primed to do anything that Trump wants to. Some of us will object to it, but I don't think we'll have enough influence.
well, I certainly think you're right that people did learn things from the Vietnam War. The wrong people learned the wrong lessons.
Right.
And that's just the way it is. Now, I have a feeling that unless somehow the American people have to pay some kind of a blood price, they're not going to object to it. We could invade Greenland, and who the hell's going to care? Because as I said, it won't be the people who have political influence. It won't be their kids who invade Panama or invade Greenland. And that was one of the things that the American power, or whatever you want to call it, the power elite, the foreign policy establishment, one of the things they learned very late in the Vietnam War was that the American people don't care what's being done with their tax dollars, as long as it's not their kids coming home in body bags. Now, the Americans learned that too late to make any difference in Vietnam. I mean, you look at as American soldiers are withdrawing from Vietnam under the Nixon regime, that the Vietnamese casualties are going through the roof. But it was too late to make any difference. But we certainly learned that by the time the Reagan wars in Central America, we were pumping $1.5 million a day into El Salvador alone on a daily basis for a decade. And Americans didn't give a rat's ass. It wasn't American kids who were dying. And what goes on with our tax dollars, they don't care. So that was another lesson. And of course, all the wars that we've been fighting have been very low cost in terms of American lives. If you look at now, that's, to the families who actually lost, I think there were there were a few thousand killed in Iraq. I think even less than that killed in Afghanistan. To those families, that loss is irreplaceable. But when you look at the casualty rates from those wars as opposed to the Vietnam War, it's not really that big a deal. And the people who were dying those families have the least voice in the American political establishment. Um, so, well,
So one advantage to the war we fought in, because a lot of the fellow soldiers and fellow Marines were draftees and came from all sectors of society, not the wealthy classes, not the well-connected, but all black and brown. And so at that young age, 17, 18, 19, 20, I was rubbing elbows with a lot of people that I didn't rub elbows with in the suburbs of Minneapolis. And that kind of shaped my view. And I think that less of that is going on in today's military. And also today's military is much more divorced from regular society. I mean, here in
oh
California,
yeah,
we got military bases here, there, and yon, but they're not connected to anything going on here in LA, not really.
oh, very much so. The U.S. military today is as I said earlier, it's a hermetically sealed culture. It's self-contained. It has very little connection to the civilian society that they're supposedly defending. And that's not, I mean, that's by design.
Yeah.
Uh, I
Yeah,
remember,
I think that's part of the lessons that were learned out of Vietnam, keep the
yes,
military off to the side and away from civilian influence.
very much so. Um, well, uh,
So Bill, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful talk. We love publishing your work. We look forward to the next piece, and we'll get here on the magic of Zoom sometime again in the future.
well, Dick, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for being willing to print the stuff I send you. And I'm sorry I don't get to see Sharon today, but please give her my best.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.